When I asked Mike why no one had told me about their move, my daughter-in-law, Nora, replied, "We didn't think it was necessary to inform you. You already live alone." A few weeks later, she called me, nervous, talking about a bad contract, and I calmly simply replied, "Do you really want me to fix this now? Because you see, there are things one does not say, truths one keeps to oneself, not out of pride, but out of principle." And that day, standing in my small apartment on the Upper West Side in New York City, the phone still warm against my ear, I understood that the time had come to remind them who Mr. Richard Miller really was. My name is Richard Miller. I am 89 years old, almost 90, God willing. I have lived alone since the death of Grace, my wife, 6 years ago. 6 years that have passed like a sigh of wind over the city, sometimes gentle, sometimes freezing. My apartment is on the third floor of an old pre-war building that has seen revolutions, earthquakes, crises, and modernizations. 3 modest but clean rooms, kept tidy with that smell of beeswax that Grace loved, and that I still use every Saturday morning. The furniture is antique, not by aesthetic choice, but because it has gone through our life together, and you do not throw away what holds meaning. The burgundy velvet sofa where we used to sit in the afternoons, the walnut table where we ate our meals, the desk where I wrote my letters by hand with a Mont Blanc pen that has been with me since I was 40. My son, Mike, is 52 years old, a handsome, tall man, his hair turning gray just like mine did at his age before going completely white. He works in computer systems, a field I only half understand, full of technical words that escape me and concepts that would have seemed like science fiction in my youth. He married Nora 15 years ago. Nora, an elegant woman, always well dressed, always in a rush, with a look that constantly calculates, evaluates, and measures. At first she told me it was the stress of work, that managing a decor boutique in Soho demanded all her energy. Grace figured her out from their very first dinner. "She looks at people like investments," she whispered to me that night in our bed, while I told her she might be exaggerating. Grace had that gift of reading souls, something that 40 years of marriage to a notary public and attorney had sharpened even more. Since my wife passed away, my relationship with Mike and Nora steadily deteriorated. At first, it was subtle. Visits became spaced out, phone calls got shorter, invitations to family meals became more rare. When I asked questions, they answered with, "You know how it is, work," or "We will call you next week, we promise." Promises that never materialized. Then came the comments, little barbs thrown like stones into a calm pond, creating ripples that never truly faded away. "Dad, don't you think this apartment is too big for just you?" "Dad, are you sure you can handle your finances properly at your age?" "Dad, maybe you should think about giving us power of attorney, just in case." I did not answer. I listened, nodded, and changed the subject, because in my generation we were taught that dignity is first defended with silence. You do not yell, you do not lose your temper. You observe, and I observed. I watched how Nora stared at our old mahogany buffet during her last visit in March, mentally appraising its value in the antique market. I watched how Mike glanced at Grace's library, where the first editions we had collected together over the decades were lined up. I watched how they whispered to each other in the kitchen, thinking my old ears could no longer catch anything. The situation truly went downhill 3 months ago in May. I had called Mike on a Tuesday night, as I did every week, to check on them. No answer. I called the next day. Voicemail. The day after. Nothing. After a week, worried, I headed to his apartment in Brooklyn. I took the subway as usual, clutching my worn leather wallet in my pocket. When I arrived outside the building, a woman was walking out with a stroller. I asked if she knew the Miller family from the 4th floor. She looked at me in surprise. "Oh, sir, they moved out 2 weeks ago. A full move with a big truck. I think they headed toward Westchester." My heart tightened. Not an overwhelming sadness, no, But that specific feeling you get when a truth you refuse to see finally hits you right in the face. My son had moved. He had left Brooklyn for Westchester without telling me. Not a phone call, not a visit, not even a letter. I thanked the woman, walked back to the subway station, and returned home in a silence that not even the roar of the train could fill. 2 days later, I found their new address thanks to an online directory shown to me by Mrs. Davis, my second-floor neighbor, a retired teacher who navigates modern technology better than I do. I dialed the number on my old rotary phone, listening to each click with a certain apprehension. Nora answered on the third ring. Her voice was cold, factual, as if she were talking to a telemarketer. I asked as calmly as I could why no one had told me about the move. There was a silence. Then I heard Mike in the background asking, "Who is it?" Nora replied, probably with her hand over the receiver, but not enough to block me from hearing, "It is your father." Then turning back to me with a detachment that froze my blood. "We didn't think it was necessary to tell you, Richard. You already live alone. You have your routines. And frankly, you didn't really have a place in our decisions anymore. This is our life, our new house, a fresh start for us." I heard the word us repeated 3 times. Us, 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 never family, never together. I asked if I could at least have their full new address to send a Christmas card, or in case of an emergency. Nora sighed, that exasperated sigh reserved for pests. "We will text it to you. Mike has to go to work. Goodbye." And she hung up. No, take care, no, we will call you soon. Just the sharp click of a disconnected line. I stood there in my living room, the receiver still in my hand, looking out the window at the New York City skyline stretching out under the June sun. The bells of a nearby cathedral chimed in the distance, striking 3 in the afternoon. I hung up slowly, sat down in Grace's armchair, the one where she loved to read in the afternoons, and closed my eyes. Not to cry. I had no desire to cry, but to think, to organize my thoughts as I had done throughout my entire career, methodically, logically, without excessive emotion, because you see, there is something Mike and Nora are completely unaware of, something I never found necessary to tell them. Not out of malice, but because in my generation a man does not boast. He does not seek applause. I never gave them the details of my career. To them I was just Dad who worked in an office, a modest retiree with a small pension, living simply in his city apartment. They saw my worn clothes, my frugal habits, my refusal to buy a car or go on vacations, and they deduced whatever they wanted to deduce. But the truth, the real truth, is that I was a practicing attorney and notary public for 42 years. Not an ordinary lawyer, no. Richard Miller, Esquire, senior partner of the Miller and Associates law firm, located in the financial district, one of the oldest and most respected in the city. I handled the estates of industrial families, multi-million-dollar real estate transactions, complex prenuptial agreements, trusts, and the wills of figures you would know if I dropped their names. For 4 decades, I was the keeper of family secrets, the advisor to the powerful, the man who drafted the documents that sealed destinies and protected fortunes. I learned to read between the lines, to detect lies, to spot manipulators, opportunists, and those who saw their aging parents as obstacles instead of human beings. I saw sons disinherit their fathers, daughters drain their mothers' bank accounts, spouses forge signatures. I prevented some of those tragedies. I documented others so justice could be served. And every time I told myself, not my family, not Mike, I raised him with values, respect, and honesty. Grace was less optimistic. "You never truly know what money reveals in people," she used to tell me often. When I retired at 70, I had built a considerable estate. Not a flashy fortune, but enough to live with dignity until my final days and leave something behind for Mike. Conservative investments, government bonds, a few stocks in solid companies, and above all, 3 real estate properties. Our apartment on the Upper West Side, a studio we rented out near Central Park, and a small family house in upstate New York. In total, a net worth estimated at around $2 million in 2018 when Grace passed away. Today, with the rise in real estate values in the city, it is probably closer to $2.5 million. I chose to tell Mike nothing, to live modestly on a retirement pension of around $3,000 a month, to keep taking the subway, to buy my clothes at the local thrift stores, to get my groceries at the local farmer's market. Why? To see, to observe, to apply what I had learned in 42 years of practice. A person's true nature is only revealed in the face of money, or the supposed lack of it. I wanted to know if my son loved me for who I was, or for what he thought he could inherit. During the 2 weeks following that freezing phone call, I stuck to my routine. Coffee at the local diner at 7 in the morning, a walk through Central Park when the weather permitted, lunch at home, a nap, reading, a light dinner, and then writing my letters. I still write by hand with my Mont Blanc and blue ink, to former colleagues, to childhood friends scattered across the country, to my sister Helen who lives in Florida. Handwriting has the virtue of slowing down your thoughts, forcing you to reflect before every word. It was during this time that I received the text message with their new address, 55 Willow Lane, Westchester, an address that immediately intrigued me. I vaguely knew Willow Lane, a residential neighborhood with massive houses, lush gardens, the kind of place where properties easily fetch $1 million or more. I wondered how Mike, with his decent but by no means extraordinary salary as a systems engineer, and Nora, with her boutique that was doing just okay according to Grace's last observations, had managed to buy such a house. My professional curiosity, the one that never left me even in retirement, woke up. I asked Mrs. Davis to help me do an online search. In a few clicks, she found the listing for the house, a gorgeous 2,000 square foot property with 4 bedrooms, a large backyard, and a 2-car garage, sold in April for $1.2 million. The price was public, listed on a local real estate agency's website. I sat back, calculating in my head. With a 20% down payment, meaning $240,000, and a 25-year mortgage, their monthly payments had to be pushing $7,000 or $8,000. Then, 3 weeks after the move, on a rainy Tuesday morning in June, while the city was drenched in a fine, persistent rain, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously, expecting a salesman. It was Nora. Her voice was different. Tense, almost nervous. A radical shift from the coldness of our last conversation. "Richard, it is Nora. We need to talk to you. It is urgent. Can you come over this afternoon?" I looked out the window at the rain falling on the streets of the Upper West Side. "Can I? What is wrong?" She hesitated. "We prefer to explain in person. Come around 3. You have the address." I took the subway and then a commuter train, gripping my black umbrella tight against the wind. The trip took about an hour. When I arrived at Willow Lane, I was impressed despite myself. Beautiful properties lined up with perfectly trimmed hedges, electric gates, and luxury cars parked in the driveways. Mike and Nora's house was at the end of the street, a contemporary build with huge windows and a beige stone facade. The yard was still unkempt, clearly showing they had not had time to deal with it. Nora opened the door before I even rang the bell. She wore black pants and a white blouse, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. "Come in, Richard." No kiss on the cheek, no smile. Mike was sitting in the living room, an open concept space with a modern kitchen, a white leather sofa, and a giant flat-screen TV. He looked exhausted, his face drawn. "Hi, Dad," he said, his voice flat. I sat in the armchair he pointed to, leaning my umbrella against the wall. Nora jumped right in without a preamble. "We have a serious problem." She sat next to Mike, their bodies forming a united front against me. "You remember when we told you we bought this house?" I nodded. Well, we made a mistake. A massive mistake in the contract. Mike leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. We signed too fast, Dad. We were in a rush. We wanted this house before someone else grabbed it. The lawyer explained a bunch of clauses, but we didn't understand everything. We just signed. Nora pulled a stack of documents from a folder on the coffee table. There was a 10-year warranty clause that the seller did not honor, roof waterproofing work that was done 8 years ago, but without a permit, without official invoices. And now the roof is leaking. The entire waterproofing needs to be redone. It is a $20,000 job, and our insurance will not cover it, because the clause was breached in the purchase agreement. Mike added, his voice shaking. We contacted the seller. He refuses to pay a dime. He says it is our problem, that we should have inspected it better before signing. I listened in silence, my hands resting on my knees, watching their anxious faces. Nora continued. We talked to a lawyer last week. He says we can sue the seller, but it is going to cost a fortune in legal fees, and the outcome is uncertain. We do not have $20,000. Our budget is already stretched to the limit with the mortgage. We drained our savings for the down payment. We are trapped. Then came the sentence, the one that made me realize why I was really there. You worked with contracts your whole life, right? Could you look over our closing documents? Maybe there is a loophole we missed, something that could help us. I looked at Mike, who avoided my gaze. Mike, you told me I just worked in an office, remember? Do you really think I can help you? Nora waved her hand impatiently. It does not matter what exactly you did. You have experience with paperwork, right? Please, Richard, we are family. It is urgent. I reached out and took the papers. Nora handed them over with visible relief. I began to read slowly, methodically turning each page with care. The purchase agreement was 28 pages long, drafted by attorney Peterson, a Westchester lawyer I did not know personally, but had heard of as a competent professional. While I read, Nora got up to make coffee. Mike stared blankly at his phone, typing nervously. The atmosphere was heavy, tense. After 15 minutes, I looked up. You are right about one thing. There is indeed a problem with the 10-year warranty clause. The seller was legally obligated to disclose the unpermitted work, and since he failed to do so, you are in a delicate situation. Nora slammed the coffee cups down on the table with a sharp clatter. So we really are trapped. There is nothing we can do. I took a sip of the coffee, way too strong for my taste, and put the cup down. I didn't say that. There is actually a legal avenue. Their faces instantly lit up. Mike sat up straight. Really? I carefully folded the documents, putting them back in their original order. You could sue the seller for hidden defects. The breach of the warranty clause constitutes a severe hidden defect that impacts the habitability of the property. With a good real estate litigator, you have about a 70% chance of winning. The court could force the seller to cover the repairs, or at the very least, partially compensate you. Nora grabbed my arm urgently. Can you help us build the case? Do you know any lawyers? Can you introduce us to them? I looked at her for a long time. This woman who, 3 weeks prior, had told me I no longer had a place in their decisions, that my life was none of their business, was now begging for my help as if nothing had ever happened. I gently pulled my arm away. I could, yes. I know several excellent attorneys in the city who handle this exact type of litigation. Mike leaned toward me. So are you going to do it? Are you going to help us, Dad? I took another sip of coffee, letting the silence settle in, feeling the weight of their expectations. Then I spoke, very calmly, very slowly. Do you really want me to fix this now? My voice was neutral. No anger, no reproach, just a factual question. But there was something in my tone that made Mike realize this was not just a rhetorical question. Nora missed it entirely. Of course we want you to help us now. It is urgent, Richard. We told you every day that passes more water leaks in. If we wait too long, the damage will get worse, and the repairs will cost even more. I stood up slowly, picking up my umbrella. I'm going to think about it. Give me a few days to study the file and see what I can do." Mike stood up as well. "A few days, Dad. We really don't have much time." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "A few days, Mike. I need time. At my age, you don't rush things like you used to." I walked out into the pouring rain, which had doubled in intensity, walking slowly toward the train station, feeling their anxious stares burning into my back from the living room window. On the train ride back to the city, I watched the suburbs, the shopping centers, and eventually the old familiar neighborhoods roll by. My mind was racing, analyzing the situation with the methodology that 42 years of practice had ingrained in me. They needed me. After shutting me out, after moving without a word, after telling me I had no place in their lives, they suddenly discovered that the useless old man possessed a valuable skill set. The irony was not lost on me, but deep down something else bothered me about their behavior. Not a single apology, not a single word of regret for how they had treated me, only the urgency of their problems, their immediate needs. Back home, I brewed some chamomile tea, sat at my desk, and unlocked the bottom drawer where I kept my important personal documents. Inside were papers I hadn't looked at in a while. My will, drafted by my old partner, attorney Peter Brooks, 4 years ago. My property deeds, my bank statements, my life insurance policies. I pulled out the will and read it carefully. In its current version, Mike inherited everything. The apartment on the Upper West Side, the studio near Central Park, the house in upstate New York, all my financial investments, my books, my furniture. Absolutely everything. It was what Grace and I had decided together while she was still alive. "He is our only son. It is only natural that he inherits it all," she had said. I had never questioned that decision after her death, even when things got tense with Mike. But now, with those documents spread out in front of me, and their plea for help delivered without an ounce of empathy, I started asking myself questions. I spent the next 3 days diving deep into my research. I called Judge Adams, an old colleague now serving on the state Supreme Court, and pitched the case to him hypothetically. His response confirmed my analysis. It was a winnable case, but it needed a sharp lawyer, and it would take 6 to 8 months of litigation. The total cost would run between $12,000 and $15,000 in legal fees, recoverable if the verdict was in their favor, but they would have to pay it up front. On Thursday, Nora called again. "So, Richard, have you thought about it? Can you help us or not?" Her voice was demanding and impatient once again. I told her that I had thoroughly reviewed their file, and that I could recommend a phenomenal lawyer. She sighed with relief. "Thank God. Give us his name and number." I paused. "Before I do that, I would like the three of us to sit down and talk quietly. Could you come over for lunch on Sunday? I will make a traditional roast, just like Grace used to make." There was a silence. "Sunday? We are kind of busy this Sunday, Richard. Can't you just give us the lawyer's info now?" I held firm. "It is important to me, Nora. A family meal. It has been a long time. An hour or two, no more. After that, I will give you all the information you need, and even more." I heard a muffled conversation between her and Mike. Then she came back. "Fine. Sunday at noon, but we can't stay long. We have things to do in the afternoon." Sunday arrived. I got up early and went down to the local farmer's market, buying the best ingredients from my usual vendor, Mrs. Higgins. Fresh vegetables, good cuts of meat, fresh bread. I spent the morning cooking, following the recipes Grace had taught me. The roast simmered slowly with herbs and spices, the potatoes roasted in the oven, a homemade apple pie cooled on the windowsill. The apartment smelled wonderful, that scent of a family Sunday dinner that reminded me of the old days. Mike and Nora arrived at noon on the dot, climbing the 3 flights of stairs with audible sighs. Nora wore a yellow summer dress, Mike a navy blue button-down shirt. They walked in, scanning the living room as if seeing it for the first time in years, perhaps noticing details they had forgotten or never truly observed. The old Persian rug inherited from my parents, the framed vintage prints of the city skyline, the collection of leather-bound books covering the entire back wall. "Smells great," Mike said, and it was probably the warmest sentence he had spoken to me in months. I invited them to sit at the table, a table I had set with care, the white tablecloth embroidered by Grace, the fine china we received as a wedding gift, the crystal glasses we only brought out for special occasions. Nora noticed these details. I saw her eyes linger on the china, once again mentally calculating its value. During the meal, we talked about trivial things. The weather finally clearing up after weeks of rain, the renovations on their new house, aside from the roof issue, the garden they planned to landscape. Mike talked about his job, a major software project he was managing using technical jargon I barely understood. Nora brought up her boutique, which was doing great right now, she claimed, though I wondered if that was actually true or if she was just projecting an image of success. What struck me most throughout that entire meal was that neither of them asked me a single real question. Not a "How are you, Dad?" or "Do you get lonely here?" or "Do you need anything?" Their concerns revolved entirely around themselves, their house, their projects, their problems. I was just an extra in their lives, physically present, but completely absent from their thoughts. By the time dessert rolled around, with an apple pie and fresh coffee, Nora finally broached the subject they really cared about. "So, Richard, this lawyer you mentioned." I cut a piece of pie, brought it to my mouth, and chewed slowly. "Yes, Attorney Evans, an excellent litigator specializing in real estate law. He has won dozens of cases exactly like yours." Mike pulled out his phone, ready to take notes. "Do you have his number?" I nodded. "I do. But before I give it to you, I would like to understand something." My tone shifted, becoming deeper, more deliberate. Nora looked up from her coffee. "Understand what?" I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers in front of me, just as I used to do in my law office before discussing a delicate matter with a client. "Understand why you did not tell me you were moving. Understand why, when I called to ask for an explanation, you told me, Nora, that I no longer had a place in your decisions. Understand why for months you treated me like a burden you wanted to discard. And understand why, now that you have a problem, you suddenly come running back to me as if nothing ever happened." A heavy silence fell over the table like a lead curtain. Nora set her cup down with a sharp clatter. "Richard, we are sorry you took it the wrong way, but we were overwhelmed with the move. We had so much to handle." I cut her off with a wave of my hand. "No, Nora, do not lie to me. Do not add that insult to injury. You were not so overwhelmed that you couldn't pick up a phone to say, 'Dad, we are moving.' A 2-minute call. That is all it would have taken." Mike tried to intervene. "Dad, it's true. We should have told you." I turned to him, and for the first time in a very long time, I let all the accumulated disappointment show in my eyes. "But what, Mike? Are you going to tell me you were too busy? That you forgot? That it wasn't important?" I kept my composure, but every word carried the weight of months of wounds. "I am your father. I changed your diapers. I took you to school every single day for years. I paid for your engineering degree. I was there for every major milestone in your life, and you move without even telling me." Nora tried to seize control of the situation. "Look, Richard, we can talk about all this later if you want, but right now our roof problem is urgent. Do you understand? Every day costs us money. If you have this lawyer's contact info, give it to us, and we can calmly discuss our family dynamics later." Her voice had taken on that condescending tone she probably used with difficult customers, as if dealing with a spoiled child throwing a tantrum at the worst possible time. I stood up slowly, walked over to my desk, and opened the bottom drawer, the one I always kept locked. I pulled out a thick beige folder packed with documents. I walked back to the table and set it down in front of them. "Before I give you that information, I want you to understand something essential that you seem to have forgotten. Or perhaps never truly knew. I flipped open the folder, revealing the first document. My law degree, dated 1963, issued by Columbia University. Mike stared at the paper in confusion. What is this? I smiled slightly, a sad smile. My law degree, Mike. I didn't just work in an office, as you always like to say with that hint of disdain. I was a notary public and a practicing attorney. Richard Miller, Esquire to be exact. Senior partner at Miller and Associates in the financial district for 42 years. I watched his expression shift from confusion to shock. Nora snatched the degree, inspecting it. You were a senior partner? But why didn't you ever just say it? I sat back down, pulling more documents from the folder. Why didn't you ever really ask? Because in my generation, a man does not brag about his profession. Because I always believed that who I was mattered more than what I did for a living. Apparently, I was wrong. I laid out photos of my old firm, a beautiful office with wood paneling, a massive law library, a massive mahogany desk, photos of me shaking hands with local politicians, the mayor, the governor during major contract signings. Mike picked up one of the photos, the one where I was in a tailored suit at an official ceremony. I don't understand. If you were a senior partner, a big shot lawyer apparently, why do you live like this? Why this modest apartment? Why do you take the subway? Why? He trailed off, but I knew exactly what he was going to say. Why do you live like a poor man when you shouldn't be? I pulled another document from the folder, the summary of my net worth prepared by my accountant just last January. Why did I choose to live simply, Mike? Because I grew up during hard times, in scarcity, and I learned the value of frugality, of modesty, of respecting what you own. I pushed the document across the table, pointing to the bottom line. And also, because I wanted to see how you would treat me if you thought I had absolutely nothing to leave you. Nora read the document, her eyes widening with every line. You have $2.5 million in assets? Her voice jumped an octave. I nodded. 3 real estate properties, conservative financial investments, life insurance, all accumulated over a 42-year career in strict financial management. Grace and I always lived far below our means, investing the difference wisely. Mike just stared at the numbers, his mouth open, speechless. I continued, my voice calm but unwavering. When Grace died, I could have changed my lifestyle. Bought a luxury car, traveled the world, moved to a massive penthouse. But I preferred to observe how my only son, the boy I raised with love and values, would treat me when he thought I was penniless. To observe if he would come see me out of love or out of interest. To observe if your wife would respect me for who I am, or despise me for what she thought I lacked. Nora pushed the paper away as if it burned her fingers. It was a test. You tested us. Her voice shook, a mix of anger and shame. Yes, Nora, a test. The exact same test I watched people fail hundreds of times from behind my desk at the firm. Families torn apart by money. Children abandoning their parents because they thought they were broke, only to come crawling back when they caught a whiff of an inheritance. I spent my whole career documenting human depravity in the face of money. I just never thought I would have to apply it to my own family. Mike stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. That is not fair, Dad. You manipulated us. You let us believe you were... He searched for the words. I was what, Mike? I asked softly. Poor, worthless, a burden? Is that how you saw me? He turned his back to me, walking to the window, his shoulders completely tense. The silence was heavy, oppressive, thick with all the unspoken truths, finally rising to the surface. Nora tried another angle, her voice artificially softening. Richard, I understand you felt neglected, but you have to see it from our perspective, too. We had our own lives, our own stress, our own worries. We didn't mean to hurt you. I looked her dead in the eye. Really? When you told me I had no place in your decisions, you didn't mean it? When you hung up on me after giving me 30 seconds of your time, you didn't mean it? I pulled another document from the folder, A newer one printed just a few days ago. Do you know what this is? They shook their heads. This is a detailed estimate of the legal fees your roofing issue is going to rack up. I contacted 3 different attorneys, 2 structural engineers, and a former judge who specializes in real estate litigation. Your case is solid. You have about a 75% chance of winning, but the process is going to take 8 to 10 months. It will cost you about $12,000 in retainer fees, plus another $4,000 for expert testimony. If you win, the seller pays it all back, plus damages. If you lose, you burn $16,000 for nothing, and you still have to pay for the roof. Mike turned back toward the table. You did all that? You did all that research? I nodded. It is my profession, Mike. Or it was. Analyzing complex legal situations, assessing risks, advising clients. 42 years of experience doesn't just vanish when you retire. I pulled out 3 business cards. Here's the contact information for 3 top-tier real estate attorneys. The first one, Attorney Evans, is a bulldog. He attacks hard and fast. The second, Attorney Clark, is a negotiator. He might get you a quick out-of-court settlement. The third, Attorney Taylor, is a brilliant, meticulous woman who builds bulletproof cases. You can choose based on your personality. Nora reached out for the cards, but I slammed my hand down on top of them before she could grab them. Wait, there is one more thing you need to know. I pulled the final document from the folder, my will. This is my current will, drafted in 2021, a year after Grace passed. Under this will, Mike, you inherit everything. Every single penny of that $2.5 million. All my properties, my books, my memories, even this Mont Blanc pen that has been in my pocket for 50 years. Mike sat down slowly. Dad, what are you trying to say? I opened the will to the page outlining the primary beneficiaries. I am saying that I have an appointment this coming Wednesday with Attorney Peter Brooks, my former partner, to change this will, because that test we were just talking about, you failed. You failed spectacularly. My voice trembled slightly now, the first real crack of emotion I had allowed to show. For 6 years since Grace died, I waited. I waited for you to come see me out of love, not obligation, to call me just to hear my voice, not to ask for a favor, to include me in your life, not just tolerate me on the edges of it. Nora had turned sheet white. Are you disinheriting him? Is that what you are saying? I shook my head. No, Nora, I'm not cutting Mike out completely. That would be cruel and disproportionate, and I'm not a cruel man, but I am substantially modifying my will. The studio apartment near Central Park, worth roughly $400,000, will go to Dignity and Solidarity America, a charity that cares for lonely elderly people. The house in upstate New York, worth around $600,000, will go to my sister Helen and her kids. And my financial investments, about $800,000, will be split among several charities. Grace and I always supported. Mike did some quick mental math. What is left for me then? I nodded. Exactly. This apartment, worth about $700,000, and whatever is left in savings. Still more than enough to live very comfortably, wouldn't you say? But certainly not the $2.5 million you were probably banking on. The phrase banking on echoed in the silence, heavy with all its implications. Mike buried his face in his hands. I can't believe you're doing this. It is manipulation, Dad. Pure and simple manipulation. I felt a cold anger rise in my chest, an anger I had not felt in decades. Manipulation? Really? And when you moved without telling me? When you told me I had no place in your lives? When you only came crawling back because you needed free legal consulting? What was that, Mike? Nora tried one last desperate tactic. Richard, you are angry. It is understandable. But you cannot make such a massive decision while you are emotional. Think about it. Think about your future grandchildren. Think about your legacy. I cut her off sharply. What grandchildren, Nora? You don't have any. And seeing how you treat me, your own flesh and blood, I shudder to think how you would raise children. I stood up, fetched a manila envelope from my desk, and tossed it onto the table. Inside this envelope is everything you need for your roofing lawsuit. the names of the 3 lawyers, their contact info, a highly detailed legal brief I drafted that will save you at least 3 billable hours with any of them, the names of 2 reliable structural engineers, and even a list of questions to hit the seller with during deposition. This is my final gift to you, not because you earned it, but because I am your father, and a father does not abandon his son, even when that son abandons him. Mike took the envelope, his hands shaking. And then what? What do we do now? I walked to the front door and pulled it wide open. Now you leave. You go back to your house. You fix your roof with the information I just handed you. And you think. You think long and hard about what a family actually is, about what respect means, about the difference between loving someone and just tolerating them out of social obligation. Nora stood up abruptly, her face twisted in fury. You are kicking us out? After making us come all the way down here? After humiliating us with your pathetic little test? I remained completely still, my hand on the doorknob. I am not kicking you out, Nora. I am freeing you from the obligation of pretending. You made it explicitly clear that I have no place in your lives. I respect your choice. Now I am making mine. Mike walked up to me, and for a fleeting second I saw something in his eyes that looked like genuine remorse. Dad, I am sorry. For everything. For the move. For not calling. For... His voice cracked. I placed my hand on his shoulder, the same hand I had held when he was a toddler taking his first steps, the hand I held walking him to his first day of school, the hand I clapped for at his college graduation. I know, Mike. A part of me knows you're sorry. But an apology without changed behavior is just manipulation. Prove to me that you're sorry. Not with words, but with actions. If, in 6 months or a year, you want to try and rebuild something, a real father-son relationship built on mutual respect and actual love, my door is always open. But you will have to take the first step. They left without another word, walking down the stairs in a suffocating silence. I listened to their footsteps echo in the stairwell, followed by the heavy thud of the building's front door closing. I stood by the window, watching them walk to their gray sedan parked on the street. Nora was waving her arms, arguing intensely. Mike walked with his head down. They got into the car and drove off, vanishing into the Sunday afternoon traffic of New York City. I walked back to the table and began clearing the plates. The roast was barely touched. The apple pie was practically whole. I packed the leftovers into containers, figuring Mrs. Davis would appreciate a good home-cooked meal this week. She lived alone, too. I carefully washed the fine china, every plate, every crystal glass, putting them right back in the hutch where they had always lived. Then I sat down in Grace's armchair with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the lace curtains. The days that followed were strangely peaceful. I fell back into my routine, but with a new lightness, as if a massive, invisible weight had been lifted off my chest. On Tuesday morning I went to the local market, picking out vegetables from Mrs. Higgins, who has run the produce stand for 30 years. She asked how my son was doing, just like she always did. For the first time, I answered honestly. We are going through a rough patch, but that is life, isn't it? She nodded with deep understanding, the kind of empathy only older people who have weathered many storms truly possess. On Wednesday, exactly as planned, I met attorney Peter Brooks at his office downtown. Peter had been my partner for 23 years before taking over the firm entirely when I retired. He was in his 60s now, sharp, meticulous, operating with the exact rigor our profession demanded. His assistant led me into his office, a room I knew by heart, where we had spent thousands of hours drafting contracts, advising clients, and untangling messy family disputes. "Richard, my old friend," he said, standing up to shake my hand warmly. "You had me intrigued on the phone. You want to rewrite your will?" We sat across from each other at his massive mahogany desk. I told him the whole story, from the secret move to the tense Sunday lunch, leaving no detail out. Peter listened with that intense professional focus I knew so well, nodding occasionally, taking notes on his leather legal pad. When I finished, he took off his glasses and slowly wiped them with a cloth handkerchief, a gesture he always made when he was thinking deeply. You know, Richard, in 40 years of practice, I have seen this exact scenario play out hundreds of times. Kids neglecting their parents, only coming around when they need a handout, or when they smell the inheritance. It has become depressingly common. He put his glasses back on. But I have to ask you the question I ask all my clients in this situation. Are you absolutely certain you want to make these changes? Because once you modify this will, if Mike finds out about it after you are gone, it will create a permanent wound. He will never be able to fix his relationship with you because you will not be here. I thought about his question, looking out the window at the busy streets of the financial district. Peter, for 6 years, I waited. I gave Mike every opportunity in the world to show me that he loved me, not for my bank account. He failed every single time. The secret move wasn't an isolated mistake. It was the logical climax of years of progressive neglect. If I leave this will as it is, I'm rewarding that neglect. I'm sending the message that you can treat your parents like garbage and still hit the jackpot in the end. That is not the legacy I want to leave. Peter nodded slowly. I follow your logic, but have you considered an alternative? Instead of rewriting the will today, you could wait 6 months, a year. See if Mike actually changes his behavior after what happened on Sunday. Give him a real chance at redemption. I smiled sadly. That is exactly what I'm going to do, Peter. I am rewriting the will today, exactly as I laid it out. The studio goes to the charity. The upstate house goes to my sister. The cash goes to the foundations. But I want to add a conditional revocation clause. Peter raised his eyebrows, clearly intrigued. A conditional revocation clause? Keep talking. I leaned forward. If Mike, over the next 12 months following the signing of this will, proves through concrete, repeated actions that he has genuinely changed, if he comes to see me regularly, not out of self-interest, but out of love, if he actively includes me in his life, then I will review this will and nullify the changes. But he will not know this will exist. He has to change without the carrot of a massive inheritance dangling in front of his face. That is the real test. Peter broke into a genuine, admiring smile. That is brilliant, Richard. Worthy of a master attorney. You are giving him a second chance, but a truly authentic one, completely devoid of manipulation. He pulled a blank legal pad from his drawer. All right then, let's draft this new will together, just like the old days. We spent the next 2 hours meticulously crafting every clause, every condition, every stipulation. Peter asked the precise legal questions. I gave my heavily considered answers. In the end, we had a bulletproof, 9-page document that drastically altered my estate while leaving the back door open for reconciliation. We will need 2 witnesses for the signing, Peter said. He called in Attorney Jones from the office next door, and my old head clerk, Mr. Smith. They arrived a few minutes later. We drank coffee while we waited, talking about the firm, the interesting cases they were handling, the latest shifts in local legislation. When it was time, I signed the will with my Mont Blanc, the very same pen that had inked so many pivotal documents in my life. 3 signatures, 3 initials, the official notary seal, and it was done. My estate was protected, redistributed according to my true wishes, yet harboring a secret clause that allowed for redemption. As I left the office, Peter shook my hand firmly. You did what you had to do, Richard, and who knows, maybe in a year you will be sitting right back in that chair telling me to rip this thing up because Mike finally figured it out. I smiled. I hope so, Peter. I truly do. But deep down in my heart, I wasn't at all sure that day would ever come. The weeks flew by, June bled into July, and then August. The city emptied out, leaving the streets to tourists and old folks like me who preferred the quiet of an urban summer. I stuck to my simple life. My morning walks through Central Park, my afternoon reading sessions, my evening letters, Mrs. Davis and I started having dinner together every Thursday night, sharing meals and old memories. Just two older people keeping each other company with zero expectations. Mike never called, not once in 2 months. I wondered if they had fixed their roof with the intel I handed them, if they had hired one of the lawyers I recommended. Part of me was curious, another part didn't care. I had fulfilled my duty as a father by handing them the tools to fix their mess. The rest was on them. Then, in late August, something unexpected happened. I was at the farmer's market, like every Tuesday morning, picking out tomatoes at Mrs. Higgins's stand, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mr. Miller? Richard Miller? Is that you?" I turned around to see a man in his 50s, sharply dressed in a suit despite the August heat. It took me a few seconds to place the face. Thomas Hayes, a former client whose incredibly messy family estate I had untangled about 15 years ago. "Mr. Hayes, what a surprise." We shared a warm handshake. He had aged, naturally, but his smile was exactly the same, genuine and direct. "I was actually looking for you, counselor. Well, not physically looking for you right this second, but I was planning on tracking you down. Do you have a few minutes? Let me buy you a coffee." I accepted, highly intrigued. We walked over to a classic local diner on the corner and grabbed a booth by the window, soaking in the air conditioning. "Look," Thomas started once the waitress dropped off our coffees. "I am now the director of Dignity and Solidarity America. We are a nonprofit that helps elderly folks who are struggling or completely isolated. We organize community events, help them navigate government bureaucracy, and fight elder isolation. Right now, we are desperately looking for qualified volunteers for our free legal aid clinic. So many seniors are getting scammed, dealing with abusive evictions, shady wills, predatory contracts. When I sat down to think about who could possibly run this clinic, your name immediately jumped to the top of my list." I took a sip of my coffee, genuinely touched and surprised. "You want me to volunteer for your organization?" Thomas nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. You have the raw experience, the legal brain, and, if I recall correctly from our time working together, you have the actual humanity required for this line of work. It would just be a few hours a week, whatever fits your schedule, at our headquarters near Central Park. You would sit down with people who desperately need guidance, help them understand their rights, protect them from predators. You would be perfect for this." I have to admit, the idea hooked me instantly. Ever since I retired, despite my comfortable routines, I occasionally missed the feeling of being truly useful, of doing something that mattered. Trying to help my own son had turned into a bitter disappointment, but helping total strangers who actually needed it, people in my exact demographic or worse, that gave me a sense of purpose. "When can I start?" I asked. Thomas's face lit up. "Seriously? You are in? That is incredible. You can start next week if you want. Come by the office. I will introduce you to the team, and we will figure out a schedule." And just like that, in early September, I started a brand new chapter of my life. Every Wednesday and Friday afternoon, I took the subway to the Dignity and Solidarity America offices. It was a large, bustling space with private consultation rooms, a small law library that I personally stocked by donating boxes of my own books, and a common area where the seniors could socialize over coffee. I had my own small desk, modest but highly functional, with a temporary nameplate on the door. Richard Miller, Legal Counsel. The people who sat across from me brought in every problem under the sun. Mrs. Brown, an 82-year-old woman whose nephew was trying to trick her into signing over her bank accounts. Mr. White, 75, trapped in a predatory phone contract he couldn't afford to cancel. Mrs. Green, 68, fighting off her own children who were trying to force her into a nursing home just so they could liquidate her apartment. Every single case hit far too close to home. Every story reminded me exactly why I had done what I did with Mike. I quickly realized that I was still sharp, still highly capable, still deeply respected. The people I advised looked at me with pure gratitude, with an authentic respect that my own son hadn't shown me in years. They often came back to see me after their issues were resolved, just to bring me homemade baked goods, small gifts, but mostly to offer their boundless thanks. "You saved my life," Mrs. Brown told me one afternoon, tears welling up in her eyes after I helped her nullify the fraudulent power of attorney her nephew had drafted. "If it wasn't for you, I would have lost everything." It was also during this period that I started getting closer to my sister Helen. We had always been on good terms, but the physical distance, she lived down in Florida, and our busy lives had whittled our relationship down to the occasional phone call and holiday card. Right after changing my will, I wrote her a long, detailed letter explaining the entire fiasco with Mike and my decision to leave her the upstate house. She called me the second she read it, deeply moved. "Richard, I do not even know what to say. That is incredibly generous. Too generous. But are you absolutely sure you want to do this to Mike?" I laid out my logic, my reasoning, the test I was running. She understood perfectly. She had gone through a brutal falling out with her own son John a few years back, before they eventually managed a difficult but genuine reconciliation. "Kids forget where they came from sometimes," she told me, "usually until it is way too late." We started talking every Sunday night, hour-long conversations where we unpacked our lives, our childhood memories, our thoughts on getting older, and the complicated nature of family. September passed, then October. The leaves in Central Park turned brilliant shades of orange and gold, that magnificent show the city puts on every autumn. I was now 89 years old, my 90th birthday rapidly approaching in December. My health was holding up. A few stiff joints in the morning, getting tired a bit faster than I used to, but nothing serious. My doctor, Dr. Carter, who had been treating me for 2 decades, gave me a glowing review at my annual physical. "You are built like a tank, Mr. Miller. You have plenty of good years left in the tank." Still no word from Mike. 4 months had passed since our explosive Sunday dinner. I swung back and forth between mourning his absence and feeling a profound sense of relief that I didn't have to endure those forced, icy visits anymore. My life was simpler now, but much more authentic. I saw Mrs. Davis regularly, my fellow volunteers at the clinic, the people I helped, and Thomas Hayes, who had become a very close friend. Ironically, I had a much richer social life now than I did when my son was actively excluding me from his. It happened in late October, on a rainy Thursday afternoon. My phone rang. Unknown number. I picked up with my usual caution. "Mr. Miller?" A male voice I didn't recognize. "Speaking." "Good afternoon. This is Attorney Evans, Real Estate Litigation. I am calling regarding your son, Mike, and his wife, Nora. They told me you were the one who referred them to my firm for their roofing dispute." My heart did a quick stutter step. "Ah, yes. I see they ended up retaining your services." Attorney Evans chuckled. "They sure did. We built a rock-solid case thanks to the incredibly detailed brief you prepared for them. Honestly, I rarely see preliminary analysis that sharp. You would have made a hell of a litigator." I smiled despite myself. "Thank you. So, how did the case pan out?" "That is exactly why I'm calling. We secured an out-of-court settlement 2 weeks ago. The seller took one look at the mountain of evidence we compiled and caved. He agreed to cover the full $20,000 for the repairs, plus all of our legal fees. It was a massive win. Your son and daughter-in-law are thrilled. But, well, when I sent them the final invoice, which included some administrative costs outside the settlement, they told me they were having cash flow issues. They asked if I could—" He hesitated. "They asked if I could call you and see if you would be willing to cover their outstanding legal fees." A dead silence blanketed the line. I felt the anger rising in my throat, that same cold, calculating anger I had kept buried for months. "Let me make sure I am hearing you correctly, counselor. The seller agreed to cover your legal fees in the settlement, correct?" "Yes, exactly. So your primary fees are paid by the seller, not by my son." "That is correct. But there were ancillary costs, expert witness retainers, travel, court filing fees. It comes out to about $4,000 that they are on the hook for. I leaned back in my chair. Attorney Evans, I am going to be exceptionally clear with you. I will not pay a single dime of those fees. My son and his wife are grown adults with very comfortable incomes who consciously chose to buy a $1.2 million house. They can foot their own bills. Furthermore, I already provided them with thousands of dollars worth of free legal consulting that saved you hours of billable work. They do not lack resources, counselor. They lack the willingness to spend their own money. Attorney Evans coughed, clearly embarrassed. I completely understand, Mr. Miller. I have to admit, I was incredibly reluctant to make this phone call, but they insisted. I will let them know you declined. No, I said firmly. Tell them exactly what I just told you, word for word. I want them to know that I see right through their little maneuver, and I am not budging an inch. After I hung up, I sat completely still for a long time, watching the rain streak the window panes. 4 months after our blow-up, the very first time Mike thought to reach out to me, it was to try and trick me into paying his bills, not to apologize, not to fix our relationship, just to siphon money out of my wallet. The test was still running, and he was still failing miserably. November rolled in, bringing the first bitter chill of the city winter, that damp cold that seeps right into your bones. I kept up with my clinic work, my walks when it wasn't freezing, my evening reading, and my letters. With my 90th birthday coming up in December, Helen insisted I fly down to spend a week at her place in Florida. You will see the ocean. You will hang out with your great-nephews. We will have a blast. Let's be honest, Richard, the city is miserable in December. Come soak up some sun. I accepted instantly. I hadn't left the city for more than a weekend in years. On December 10th, I hopped on a flight to Florida, packing just a small suitcase and making sure my Mont Blanc was safely tucked into my jacket pocket. Helen was waiting for me at the arrivals gate. She was 73 now, full of life, flashing that same warm smile that reminded me so much of our mother. Her house backed right up to the water, offering a stunning view I could admire right from the guest bedroom she set up for me. The week was absolute perfection. We talked for hours, reliving our tough childhood in the city, talking about our parents, our very different life paths. She introduced me to her 3 grandsons, polite, affectionate kids, who called me Uncle Richard and sat quietly, listening to my stories about how the city used to look back in the day. We walked the boardwalk, ate fresh seafood by the marina, checked out the local historic sites. It was a completely different life, brighter, louder, and infinitely less lonely. One night, while we were eating dinner out on her patio, wrapped in light sweaters against the ocean breeze, Helen finally asked the question I knew was coming. Any word from Mike? I shook my head. Aside from trying to get his lawyer to bill me for his legal fees? No, absolutely nothing. She sighed heavily. You know, my John went through a really dark phase too. Barely spoke to me for 2 solid years after his divorce. Blamed me for God knows what. It was a nightmare. But one day he just showed up. He cried, we finally had it out, and ever since then we have built something genuinely solid. Maybe Mike will have that click moment too. I stared out at the boat lights bobbing in the dark harbor. Maybe, or maybe not. And I'm starting to make peace with the fact, Helen, that my son might never become the man I hoped he would be, that our relationship might stay shattered until the day I die. It is heartbreaking, obviously, but in a weird way it is also liberating. I expect nothing from him anymore, which means he can no longer disappoint me. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. You are not alone, Richard. You have me. You have my kids and grandkids who already adore you. You have your friends back home, your work at the clinic. You have a rich, meaningful life. She was right. At almost 90 years old, I had discovered that you could rebuild a life from the ground up, forge new connections, find profound meaning outside of your biological family. It was an incredibly valuable lesson, even if it took me 9 decades to learn it. I flew back to New York on December 18th, sporting a Florida tan, feeling rested and completely recharged. My 90th birthday landed on December 22nd. I had decided not to make a big deal out of it. Just a quiet dinner with Mrs. Davis and Thomas Hayes. On the evening of the 21st, I was prepping some food for the next day when my cell phone buzzed. It was Mike's number. I stared at the glowing screen for 4 rings, my heart hammering against my ribs, debating whether to answer. On the 5th ring, I picked up. Yes? My voice was flat, highly guarded. Dad, it is Mike. There was something entirely different in his voice, a tightness, a raw emotion I couldn't quite put my finger on. Good evening, Mike. What can I do for you? A long pause. Then, I just wanted to call and wish you a happy birthday. You're turning 90 tomorrow, right? I was genuinely shocked he remembered. Yes, 90 years old. Another heavy silence. Dad, could I come see you tomorrow during the day? I would really like to talk to you. I hesitated. One side of my brain screamed at me to say no, to protect the fragile peace I had spent months building. But the other side, the side of the father who will always love his son no matter how badly he screws up, wanted to leave the door cracked open. Come at 3. I have guests coming for dinner, but my afternoon is clear. The next morning, my birthday, I woke up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I went through my morning routine, but my brain was completely distracted, anticipating Mike's arrival. At exactly 3 o'clock, the buzzer rang. I opened the door. Mike stood there alone. No Nora. He was wearing a dark sweater and holding a large bouquet of white calla lilies, Grace's favorite flowers. He looked terrible. His face was drawn deep, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 5 months. Hi, Dad. Happy birthday. He held out the flowers. I took them and stepped aside to let him in. He walked down the hallway slowly, like a dead man walking to the gallows. He sat on the sofa. I took my usual armchair. I placed the flowers on the coffee table between us. You came alone, I noted. He nodded slowly. Nora and I separated. Well, we are getting a divorce. She moved in with her sister in Queens 3 weeks ago. I didn't say a word, just waited for him to keep going. He took a massive, shuddering breath. After that lunch in June, everything just fell apart. The cracks were already there for years, but that whole roofing nightmare, and specifically your reaction when we asked for money, blew it wide open. We fought constantly. She screamed at me for having a useless, broke father who wouldn't even float us a loan. I snapped and told her you weren't broke at all, that you just chose not to help us because of how we treated you. He rubbed his face aggressively with both hands. She didn't get it, or rather, she got it perfectly. She realized you had serious money, but that we weren't getting a dime of it, and it drove her absolutely insane. She started demanding that I go make up with you, not because it was the right thing to do, but to get you to change your will back. She actually told me to go play the sorry, repenting son, just to secure the inheritance. His eyes filled with tears. And right then, in that exact second, it finally hit me. I realized that in 15 years, Nora never actually cared about you. To her, you were just a walking ATM. And the worst part is, I let her twisted view poison the way I treated you. I listened in total silence, keeping my face entirely blank. He kept going, the words tumbling out of him fast now, like he had to purge them before he lost his nerve. I spent the last 5 months doing a lot of hard thinking, Dad, really looking in the mirror at the man I turned into, looking at how I treated my own father. I kept thinking about when I was little, how you read to me every single night, how you took me to the Natural History Museum every Sunday, how you sat at the kitchen table helping me with math for hours, how you and Mom paid for my entire college tuition without ever once making me feel like I owed you. He stood up, pacing over to the window, staring down at the street, and I realized I repaid every single ounce of that with pure indifference, then with disrespect, then with total abandonment. He turned back to face me. when Attorney Evans called me and repeated exactly what you said to him. I have never felt so ashamed in my entire life. Because you were right. You were 100% right. I was still trying to use you. Take, and never give. Even after you laid it all out for me in June, I still didn't get it. He walked back over and looked me dead in the eye. I didn't come here today to ask for your forgiveness, because I am pretty sure I don't deserve it. I came here to tell you that I finally get it, that you were completely justified in testing me, that I failed spectacularly, and that I am going to have to live with that shame for the rest of my life. His voice cracked, tears finally spilling over. I came to tell you that you are an incredible man, that you were a phenomenal father, and I never deserved you. And I came to tell you that if you are ever willing, not today, maybe not for a very long time, but someday I would love the chance to try and rebuild this, not for the money, not for the will, but because you are my dad and I love you, even if I did a terrible job of showing it. I sat in absolute silence for a very long time, letting those words echo off the walls of the apartment. At 90 years old, you learn that talk is incredibly cheap, that the absolute truth only lives in actions. But you also learn that sometimes you have to leave the door open for redemption, that refusing to ever forgive anyone is a one-way ticket to a bitter, lonely grave. Sit down, Mike. He sat back down, aggressively wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. You're right about a lot of things. You acted terribly. You hurt me on a very deep level. And yes, you failed the test I set for you in spectacular fashion. But you are also right when you say you finally understand. I can see it in your eyes. I can hear it in your voice. You are not the same man who sat in this room in June demanding free legal work without a shred of remorse. I paused, letting the silence hang. But understanding is just step one, Mike. What matters now is what you do with that understanding. He nodded furiously. I know, Dad. I know I have to prove I have changed. Not with apologies, but with actions. I am ready to do that, however long it takes. I stood up, walked to the liquor cabinet, and grabbed 2 glasses and a bottle of top-shelf tequila, a bottle I saved strictly for major life events. I poured 2 neat fingers, walked back, and handed him a glass. To my 90th birthday, then, and to the very real possibility of a new chapter for us, one built on actual honesty and mutual respect. We clinked glasses and drank in silence. Then I looked at him. Mike, I am going to tell you something you don't know. I rewrote my will back in June. You are no longer inheriting everything. A massive chunk of my estate is going straight to charity and to your Aunt Helen. I watched all the blood drain from his face, but he didn't argue. He didn't protest. He just gave a tight nod. That is exactly what I deserve. I completely understand. But, I continued, holding up a finger, that will contain a highly specific clause that I am only telling you about right now, because I believe you are actually being genuine. If, over the next 12 months, you prove to me through consistent, undeniable actions that you have changed, that we can actually rebuild a healthy relationship, I will rewrite the will again, not to give you every last dime, but to balance it out more fairly. You have exactly 1 year to prove to me that you are the man I raised you to be. His eyes went wide. You are giving me another chance? I am giving you the opportunity to earn another chance. Yes. But listen to me very carefully, Mike. I am watching you like a hawk. I refuse to be manipulated ever again. If I get even a hint that you are playing a role, that you are faking it for a payday, the door slams shut forever. What I want is a son who actually loves me, who comes over because he wants to, not because he is legally required to. Are we crystal clear? Crystal clear, Dad. I swear to God, I will never let you down again. We sat and talked for another hour, a real, actual conversation. The first one we had in years. He gave me the brutal details of his divorce, his total burnout with his corporate job, how incredibly lonely he was rattling around in that massive house in Westchester. I told him all about the legal clinic, my trip down to Florida, this entirely new life I had built while he was ignoring me. When he finally left around 4:30, we shook hands, and then he pulled me in for a hug, kissing me on the cheek, something he hadn't done unprompted in at least a decade. Happy birthday, Dad, and thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me completely. That night, my birthday dinner with Mrs. Davis and Thomas Hayes was an absolute blast. They brought over a massive cake with 90 candles that took me 3 separate breaths to blow out, sending us all into hysterics. Thomas raised a glass of champagne. To Richard, a man who proves that even at 90 you can completely reinvent yourself, find a new purpose, and radically change people's lives. We drank, we ate, we laughed, and we talked well past midnight. The months that followed were, in many ways, the richest of my entire life. Mike kept his word. He came over every single Sunday, sometimes bringing fresh pastries from the bakery, sometimes just bringing himself. We talked about everything and nothing: politics, books, the history of the city, his childhood memories. He even tagged along to the clinic a few times, meeting the folks I was helping, finally understanding what it meant to serve people who could offer absolutely nothing in return. In February, he took me out for a massive steak dinner at a high-end spot downtown. My treat, he said, to make up for all the dinners I skipped. We took our time, savoring the food, enjoying the conversation. He confessed that he wanted to drastically change careers, do something that actually mattered, maybe transition into the nonprofit sector. I listened, advised him, encouraged him, completely reclaiming the role of the father I thought I had lost forever. In March, he drove me up to the house in upstate New York, a place I hadn't stepped foot in since Grace passed away. We walked through the woods, ate at the local diner, sat on the back porch staring at the mountains stretching out in front of us. "This place is magic," he said quietly. "I forgot how much I loved it up here when I was a kid." I told him stories about his childhood summers out here, building forts in the woods, exploring the town. He listened with a sweet, heavy nostalgia, unearthing memories he had buried for decades. In April, for Easter, he hosted a big dinner at his place in Westchester and flew Helen up from Florida specifically for it. It was the first time I had been back to that house since our explosive showdown the previous June, and I was deeply moved by the effort he put into it. The table was flawlessly set. He spent all day smoking a brisket and prepping homemade sides. He and Helen hit it off instantly, talking for hours while she told embarrassing stories about my childhood that even I had forgotten. As we were drinking coffee in the living room after dessert, Mike cleared his throat. "Dad, Aunt Helen, I have some news. I officially quit my corporate tech job last week. I took a part-time position as the IT director for Dignity and Solidarity America. Thomas Hayes desperately needed someone to completely overhaul their outdated systems, build a tracking database for the seniors, and redesign their website. It pays exactly half of what I was making before, but I cannot even begin to explain how incredibly excited I am about this." I felt my chest swell with intense pride, not because he was copying me, not because he was fishing for my approval, but because I could see that he finally got it. He finally realized that using your skills to help vulnerable people brings a level of satisfaction that a massive corporate salary simply cannot buy. Helen hugged him fiercely, and I just reached over and squeezed his shoulder. No words were necessary. In May, almost exactly 1 year after our initial confrontation, I walked back into attorney Peter Brooks's office. Peter greeted me with his trademark grin. "So, Richard, how did the trial year go?" I laid out the last 12 months in detail, the total shift in Mike's behavior, his consistency, his career change, his actions. Peter listened, nodding, fully recognizing the undeniable signs of true transformation. He actually pulled it off. That is incredibly rare, you know. Most people in his shoes would have faked it for 3 months and then snapped right back to their old toxic habits. "I know," I replied. "That is why I am here to rewrite the will one last time. not to give him everything back, but to balance the scales. But we worked for 2 solid hours drafting the final version. Under this new will, Mike would inherit the Upper West Side apartment and the studio, roughly $1 million in assets. The upstate house went to Helen, exactly as promised, and a massive chunk of my cash investments, about $1 million, was locked into trusts for various charities, including Dignity and Solidarity America, where Mike was now employed. It was perfectly fair. It validated his profound personal growth while honoring my other deeply held commitments. "Are you going to tell him?" Peter asked. I shook my head. "Not yet. I want to make sure this sticks. Maybe for my birthday in December. That will be 18 months since the blow-up. That feels like the right time." We executed the documents with the standard witnesses and the notary seal. As I walked out onto the street, I felt completely at peace, like a massive, jagged circle had finally been closed. Summer came and went, fading into autumn. Mike stayed perfectly consistent. He thrived at the nonprofit, where we occasionally bumped into each other, him running cables in the IT room, me reviewing contracts in the legal clinic. The seniors he helped with their busted phones and confusing online forms constantly pulled me aside to sing his praises. "Your son is an absolute angel," Mrs. Brown told me one afternoon. "He spent 2 solid hours helping me file my taxes online. He is so patient." I just smiled, overflowing with pride, knowing that he hadn't just inherited my DNA, he had finally inherited my moral compass. Today is my 91st birthday. I'm looking back on my life with a profound, quiet satisfaction. Mike is coming over in an hour for lunch, bringing Helen, whom he picked up from the airport this morning. Thomas Hayes and Mrs. Davis are coming over tonight for a bigger celebration. My life is overflowing, rich with authentic connections, meaningful work, and heavily earned respect. The situation with Mike could have ended in disaster. He could have walked out that door and never looked back. He could have stayed locked in his own greed and selfishness until the day I died. But he chose the hard road, the brutal, humbling road of intense self-reflection and authentic change. Does it magically erase years of neglect? Not entirely. Some cuts leave scars that never fully fade. But he proved to me that human beings can change, that hope is never completely dead, and that sometimes a brutal, honest confrontation is the only surgical tool capable of saving a dying relationship. If I could offer one piece of advice, one ironclad lesson from this entire ordeal, it would be this: dignity is never up for negotiation. I do not care how old you are, how much money you have, or how dependent you think you are on others. You demand respect. And if your own children, your own flesh and blood, refuse to treat you with basic human decency, it is your absolute duty to force the issue, even if it means tearing the family apart for a while. Tolerating disrespect is a betrayal of your own soul. It validates the toxic idea that your only value lies in your bank account, not in your humanity. I also learned that you can reinvent yourself at any stage of the game. At 89 years old, I launched a volunteer career that brings me more daily joy than my 4 decades of corporate law ever did. I rebuilt a fractured bond with my sister. I forged powerful new friendships. Life does not stop just because you get old, it just changes shape, and you are the only one holding the clay. As for the money, the wealth that acted as the catalyst for this entire explosive saga, I finally understood its true nature. Money isn't inherently good or evil. It is a magnifying glass. It reveals exactly who you are, what you truly value, and how you view the people around you. It ruins weak men, but it empowers strong men. It gives you the leverage to do genuine good, to test the loyalty of your inner circle, and to armor yourself against predators. My wealth allowed me to run this test, to expose a painful truth, and ultimately, to force my son to look in the mirror. It was agonizing, but it saved his soul. The buzzer rings. It is Mike and Helen. I push up out of my armchair, smooth out my shirt, and check my reflection in the hallway mirror. An old man stares back at me, 91 years old, snow-white hair, deep canyons carved into his face, but with eyes that are still razor-sharp and a spine that is still relatively straight. A man who survived crushing poverty as a child, built a highly respected career, loved his wife fiercely, suffered betrayal, tested his blood, granted forgiveness, and continues to find purpose in every single sunrise. I open the door. Mike is holding a massive bouquet of white calla lilies. Helen is holding a homemade cake. Their faces are lit up with bright, genuine smiles. Their eyes shine with authentic love. "Happy birthday, Dad," Mike says, pulling me into a tight hug. "Happy birthday, big brother," Helen adds. I step back and usher them inside, closing the door firmly behind them. I turn to face them with a wide smile. "Come in, come in. I made a traditional roast, just like Mom used to make, and I have something incredibly important I need to share with both of you." We sat down at the table I had set perfectly. The fine china, the crystal glasses, the embroidered tablecloth. Mike poured the wine, a beautiful red from a local vineyard he had brought. Helen sliced the bread. I served the roast, the potatoes, and the fresh vegetables. Throughout the meal, we talked, we laughed, we shared stories. Mike told a hilarious story about a senior at the clinic he helped reconnect with her estranged daughter over a video call. Helen talked about her grandkids and her garden in Florida. I sat back and listened, my heart overflowing with an overwhelming sense of gratitude for this incredibly simple yet priceless moment. After we finished eating, as we sipped our coffee and sliced into Helen's incredible homemade cake, I stood up and walked over to my desk. I came back holding 2 manila envelopes, one for Mike, one for Helen. These are copies of my new will, finalized 6 months ago. I wanted you to know exactly what is in them now, while I am still sitting at this table to explain it. They both opened their envelopes with visible hesitation. Mike read the pages in total silence, his face shifting through a rapid cycle of emotions: shock, relief, profound gratitude. "Dad, you changed it again? You are giving me way more than I ever thought." I nodded slowly. "Mike, you passed the test. Actually, you didn't just pass it. You shattered it. You proved through grinding, consistent action that you fundamentally changed, that we could rebuild this family on solid ground. This will simply reflects that reality. You will inherit this apartment and the studio. It is more than enough to live comfortably and secure your future. Helen is getting the upstate house she loves so much, and the rest of the liquid assets will go directly to charity, heavily favoring Dignity and Solidarity America, where you now dedicate your time." Mike had tears streaming down his face. I don't know what to say. After everything I did, after how I treated you, "You say thank you," I cut in softly, "and you continue being the exact man you have become over this last year. Because this will is not a reward for your past behavior. It is an investment in the man I know you will be tomorrow." Helen was wiping her eyes with her napkin. "Richard, this is just too much. That house is worth... It is worth exactly what you deserve, Helen, for being there when I was isolated, for taking me in when I was lonely, for being the sister you always were, and the sister I finally rediscovered this past year." We stood up and wrapped our arms around each other, a long, fiercely tight embrace, heavy with everything that words could no longer carry. That night, when Thomas and Mrs. Davis arrived, the apartment practically shook with joy. Thomas brought a bottle of incredible bourbon. Mrs. Davis brought a mountain of homemade food. We drank, we ate, we laughed until our ribs ached. I even found myself swaying to the music playing on the old radio, propped up by Mike and Helen, a 91-year-old man dancing in his living room. At midnight, after everyone had packed up and left, I found myself alone in the quiet apartment. I sat down in Grace's armchair with one final cup of chamomile tea. I looked at the framed photos covering the wall. Grace and I on our wedding day, Mike as a chubby toddler, our young family vacationing upstate, and right next to them the new photos we had just added. Mike and me standing outside the clinic, Helen wrestling with her grandkids in Florida, a group shot from my 90th birthday, a full, heavy, magnificent life, a life forged through brutal lows and incredible highs, through ugly betrayals and beautiful reconciliations, through profound pain and overwhelming joy. And looking at that wall, I realized the ultimate truth. In the end, it doesn't matter how much money is sitting in your bank account. It doesn't matter how many years you manage to cheat death, or how many plaques hang on your office wall. The only thing that truly matters is how you treat human beings. Whether you refuse to compromise your morals when the pressure is on, whether you possess the iron spine required to demand respect from the people you love the most, and whether you have the ultimate grace to grant forgiveness when forgiveness has truly been earned.